In 2007, a particularly disturbing case was featured on the 5th season of Snapped.
I've never seen one like that in my life, to entomb someone after death.
Absolutely liquefied body that was probably the first and only case that's come through here.
After nearly 2 decades, a deeper look into the investigation explores a killer's disturbing history of violence.
I lifted the lid of the trash can, and the odor was the unmistakable smell of death.
Leading to the discovery of even more heinous crimes.
They found a adult male body, chopped multiple times in the back.
He had a bag over his face. This was an undeniable pattern.
And new interviews examine the motives that drove them to commit such unspeakable acts.
She attacked her because she hated her.
She was collecting those Social Security payments for about 2.5 years.
Leading to shocking new developments from behind bars.
Something unbelievable happened at the state prison.
She is cunning, sneaky, and I would not be surprised if she tries it again.
February 5th, 2001. At approximately 1:30 p.m., police in Las Vegas, Nevada receive an ominous call from the manager of a storage facility.
The concern that the storage unit manager had is that there had been numerous complaints of a foul odor emanating from somewhere in the storage facility. They said the odor was the unmistakable smell of death.
When officers arrive on the scene, the manager takes them to the storage unit in question.
The moment they rolled up the door, they're hit with a pungent scent of decaying flesh.
When they got in, they found a canister, a large garbage pail, like what you roll out to the curb at your house.
There was plastic wrap around the top of the trash receptacle, as well as duct tape.
They did a presumptive test for blood, which came back positive. That in turn led the authorities to pursue a telephonic search warrant, which would allow them to legally cut open the can.
Inside, I saw a human being in an advanced state of decomposition.
I've never seen one like that in my life. It was a terrible way to entomb someone after death.
They could not really tell how long the body had been there because this body basically was sealed in this contained environment for who knows how long.
Cause of death is impossible to determine, but the circumstances suggest foul play.
They noticed that there was a bag that appeared to be tied around this person's face.
Somebody had taken great care and pain and effort in order to try to seal this garbage can. It certainly was done by an individual that did not want this body to be discovered.
I found a wallet with a driver's license in the name of Christine M. Smith in a plastic bag in the unit.
They learned that this particular unit was leased out and rented out to a woman named Brookey-Lee-West, who was Christine Smith's daughter.
Our initial belief is that the deceased person in the trash can was Brookey-West's mother, but we didn't know. We had to confirm that. We needed to locate Brookey-West to see what she had to say about the situation, to see what she knew.
For both Christine and Brookey, life had always been a challenge.
Christine Smith grew up in a rural Texas town, and her father was a truck driver. Her mom was a stay-at-home mother, and things started to go south for Christine at an early age.
From the way she talked about her life, she had one traumatic experience after another.
In 1947, Christine met an El Paso man named Leroy Smith.
Smith was somebody who just came out of the military. He was now looking for a job and to start his own family. And Christine Smith and Leroy, they caught each other's eye, and eventually they got married.
Leroy joined the police force, and the couple had 2 children, Brookey and a son named Travis.
At first, it seemed like this was a dream come true for Christine. But over time, she would find herself in an abusive relationship.
Her husband, even though he worked for the police, was not law-abiding.
He was a known white supremacist, and he also became very interested in the occult and Satanism. At one point, Leroy left Christine for a cocktail waitress.
Leroy took the children, sending Christine into a downward spiral. She began an affair of her own with a married man named David.
She fell madly in love with him, and over time realized that she'd been bamboozled, that he had no intention of leaving his wife, and that he was just using Christine for sex. She asked to meet him at a bar. The man showed up, sat down. Christine pulled out a shotgun and shot him at point-blank range.
I was like, oh my God, how could you do that? She said, he discarded me. I was angry at having been treated like garbage.
Christine was quickly arrested after shooting her lover. She ended up getting a sentence of 14 years for an attempt murder charge.
However, Christine was paroled after serving only 2 years of her sentence. Upon her release, she was determined to turn her life around.
Christine comes out, she reunites with Leroy, and she comes back looking for her children.
However, 9-year-old Brookey and 6-year-old Travis were now living under state-sponsored care.
Once Christine was incarcerated, Leroy Smith decided he didn't want anything to do with his kids anymore and dropped them off at an orphanage. One day, they got a huge surprise. Leroy showed up at the orphanage with Christine. She had recently been released from prison, and Leroy and Christine took the kids back.
Leroy moves the whole family to California.
After high school, Brookey briefly enlisted in the Army before transitioning to a career in technology.
Well, during the military, Brookey learned a lot of skills, and it was in that time period when computers became more and more prevalent. She has innate ability to understand coding, numbers, very detailed information that she's able to memorize and maintain.
Over the next 2 decades, Brookey found great success in the field of technical writing.
A technical writer is someone who produces documents. You might write a manual on how to install a computer program.
Life was pretty good. She was able to buy a house in Los Banos, California.
But her mother had some problems. Her mother had been sick one occasion, and she would take care of her mother. She would move back and forth between Las Vegas and San Francisco for work, so she kept residences both places.
My understanding is that Brookie moved her mom to Las Vegas because it was a lot cheaper at the time than living in California. There was activity that Christine liked. She enjoyed being close to the casinos.
Brookie split her time between the two states until 1997, when the 44-year-old permanently relocated to Las Vegas to live with her 65-year-old mother. The pair settled into a happy rhythm. But 4 years later, their reunion has ended in tragedy. A decomposed body has been discovered hidden in a storage unit rented by Brookie, and investigators want to know who it belongs to.
The can with the body inside was transported to the Clark County Coroner's Office, and a very unusual autopsy unfolded. They took the can and basically tipped it upside down and poured the contents out onto a gurney.
Absolutely liquefied body that was probably the first and only case that's come to here.
There was insect larvae, maggots, that were on and around the body. And authorities collected many samples of these insects.
The cause and manner of death was unknown. There was nothing obvious, no gunshot wounds, no stab wounds, none of the things you might associate with some kind of violent event.
The victim's teeth are intact, allowing the coroner to use dental records to positively ID the body as Christine Smith. One mystery has been solved, but more arise when detectives take a closer look at the items in the storage unit.
There were books dealing with witchcraft, books dealing with black magic, books dealing with Satanism, and things of that nature.
The crime scene itself was so unusual and so bizarre that you can't help but ask, could these be related? Could this involve Satanism, witchcraft, occult behavior?
Coming up, investigators dig into Christine and Brookie's past.
Some days you thought that they loved each other dearly, and other days you thought they hated each other.
And they uncover a second mysterious death.
There appeared to be a bag over the victim's face.
Detectives in Las Vegas, Nevada are investigating the disturbing death of 68-year-old Christine Smith. It's a crime scene unlike any they've ever encountered.
Of course, Las Vegas has a real dark side to it. But the idea of finding a garbage can with a body in it in a storage shed and books about witchcraft and Satanism, I mean, their minds were spinning as to what could possibly explain this.
Her daughter, Brookey-West, is the first person they need to speak with.
They had a lot of questions regarding Christine Smith. First and foremost, how did she die? But the bigger question was, how did she get in that garbage can? And why is she in a storage unit that came back to Brookey-West?
When police check Christine's last known address, they discover it was also leased to Brookie.
The two homicide detectives ended up getting a search warrant and going to her apartment.
They knock on the door and Brookey-Lee-West is not there. They went inside and started looking around. Clearly a nice apartment, lots of nice belongings in there.
There was not a lot of furniture in there, but clearly it had been occupied.
It appears that only Brookie had been living there. Investigators also find several pieces of suspicious evidence.
We found duct tape. We found what we believe to be the key to the lock for the storage room that Christine's body was in.
When they did a forensic analysis on that duct tape, they found that it was a perfect match to the duct tape that had been wrapped around the garbage can. Investigators then started to really take a close look at the paperwork that they found in the apartment, specifically bank records. They noticed that Brookey-Lee-West was collecting money, Social Security, that was supposed to go to her mother. And it made for a very suspicious circumstance and a likely scenario that Brookey was involved in her mother's death.
They speak to Christine and Brookey's neighbors to try to shed light on their relationship. What they learn is eye-opening.
Some days you thought that they loved each other dearly, and other days you thought they hated each other.
I didn't really want to get involved at all, you know, so Sandy told me a couple things about him every once in a while.
They had this kind of double-edged relationship. They would fight, they would be at odds with one another. It was a back and forth kind of up and down situation.
According to Christine's friends, the source of the conflict dated back to Brookey's childhood. Christine's own upbringing had left scars and poor boundaries for raising her daughter.
It seemed like Christine was very dysfunctional, and she needed Brookey for that dysfunction.
Christine basically taught Brookey how to be a criminal. When she was a child, they became shoplifters and swindlers and grifters, and so this was Brookey's role model. Growing up, it became apparent to Brookey that she needed to get away from her mother, so she decided to join the Army.
When the two reunited and began living together, the dynamic between them seemed to flip. Now, 44-year-old Brookey was the one in control.
When she offered to take care of her mother, she made it clear there were limitations. Christine was not allowed to have visitors to their home. She was not allowed to talk about what went on in their home or about her relationship with Brooke or anyone else.
In approximately January or February of 1998, Christine just seemed to fall off the face of the earth. When Christine's friends started to inquire about what happened, they started asking Brookey-Lee-West, you know, where's your mother?
What Brooke had told everyone is that she had been taken to live with her brother, Travis.
The neighbors thought it was suspicious because she had heard Travis was severely mentally ill, that he was not able to take care of himself, that he was walking the streets and was homeless.
It just didn't make any sense at all, and they quickly concluded that this was all a big lie. She had not been seen since nearly 3 years prior to the discovery of her body.
To investigators, the news seems to confirm their suspicions about Brookey's involvement.
Well, about an hour after they left her apartment, the manager called and said that Brookey-West had returned to the apartment, but had left. And the manager had a description of her vehicle.
At one point, they do in fact spot Brookey driving in her truck, and she is pulled over and taken into custody and arrested on a charge of murder for the killing of her mother.
The only thing that Brooke ever told the police was, my mom died of natural causes.
According to Brookey, she found her mother dead in 1999.
She claimed that she simply panicked and decided to dispose of her mother in the garbage can.
News of the horrific crime scene and Brookey's arrest seizes headlines across the country.
The circumstances were so unusual that it drew a lot of attention. And that media coverage made its way to California. Las Vegas police learned that Christine Smith wasn't the first person close to Brookey-Lee-West who had died under suspicious circumstances. A detective in California reached out to the Las Vegas detectives to let them know that, hey, just a few years earlier, Brookey-Lee-West was my prime suspect in her husband's murder.
After learning that Brookey-West was connected to a previous homicide, Las Vegas investigators asked their counterparts in California to walk them through the details of that unsolved case.
On June 6, 1994, Tulare County Sheriff's Department received a 911 call from a tourist who was visiting the Sequoia National Forest. This individual who was picnicking with his family discovered the body of a male that was found on the side of the road.
Officers responded, and it was clear that this was a homicide, and there appeared to be a bag over the victim's face. They looked for any signs of a weapon and couldn't find anything.
There did not appear to be any foul play around the location.
They quickly concluded that the victim had been shot elsewhere and that this was actually a dump site. Fingerprints were taken from the deceased, and they soon found out that their victim was a man named Howard Simon St. John.
The body of Howard St. John was transported to the coroner's office for further analysis.
Authorities looked at the condition of the body, and they were able to determine that he had died relatively recently, within the last 12 to 24 hours.
Howard St. John had been shot multiple times in the back. Either he was running away in fear for his life, or he was completely shot by surprise.
They also uncovered an interesting clue, which was a .32 caliber bullet was lodged in his neck, and it appeared to be from a separate shooting. It did not appear to be related to his death. Howard had been shot in a separate incident, and he survived.
Based on the limited amount of healing from that earlier gunshot wound, the coroner believed it happened just a few weeks prior.
They learned that Howard had a significant record involving petty crimes, mostly involving alcohol abuse.
He was from a tough side of town in the San Jose Bay Area, San Francisco. He had been in and out of jail. And they also learned a very important fact, which was he was in a very tumultuous marriage with a woman by the name of Brookey-Lee-West.
Investigators contacted Howard's family to learn more about his marriage and his life.
What they learned was that Howard Simon St. John was born in May 1958 to Sylvester and Catherine St. John in Redwood City, California. They traced him to a nearby Tulare County Indian reservation. He had a history there, grew up there, and wanted to explore his Native American roots. He'd been there for many years and had at one point a stable family life early on. But, over time, Howard struggled with alcohol and drugs and ended up homeless.
After several years struggling with addiction, Howard's friends got him into a shelter and he started Alcoholics Anonymous. He and Brookey met at one of the meetings in the spring of 1994.
Brookey-West was attending these AA meetings not because she was an alcoholic, but she was actually bringing her elderly mom, Christine Smith, and she suddenly started eyeing Howard St. John.
She appeared to be well off, a well-dressed, beautiful woman who was very successful.
He showed up in t-shirts, unkempt clothing, did not seem to have any money, and those are two people that you would not have expected to see get together, but a relationship blossomed. Next thing you know, Howard St. John is telling everyone that he was moving into Brookey's home.
Within a matter of a month or two, they ended up going to Reno, eloping, and getting married in Nevada.
In this investigation that I received from the Tulare County Sheriff's Department, there was a notation about the first domestic violence that occurred about 2 weeks prior to Howard's death. On May 21st, about a month after they got married, there had been an altercation and domestic violence situation, and Brookey used a firearm to shoot at Howard. He was shot in the neck.
So on June 9th, 1994, investigators went to their home in California to question her about his death.
You have a prior domestic dispute involving gun violence, and then a few weeks after that, Howard turns up dead. So it would be logical for the authorities to really scrutinize this relationship.
Coming up, an unsolved death sheds light on the current murder investigation.
I was surprised and kind of eerily seeing similarities.
And detectives try to bring a remorseless killer to justice.
This case was about greed, hatred, selfishness.
After Brookey-Lee-West emerged as the prime suspect in the investigation into her husband's murder, California investigators went to their home to question her. A woman answered the door, but it wasn't Brookey. It was her 62-year-old mother, Christine Smith.
When the authorities talked to Christine Smith, she had very negative things to say about Howard Simon St. John. She said that he was a bum, that he drank all the time, he didn't work, and that, frankly, her exact words were, he's as crazy as a bedbug.
Nobody understood his purpose in Brooke's life. He didn't appear to have any job because he would be at home whenever she was gone to work. In comparison to Brooke, he was a slob.
She said he had a long-term alcohol problem and had a history of being violent with Brooke.
In the process, too, she started talking about the incident that happened 2 weeks prior.
She said that Brookey had accidentally put Howard's wallet and identification through the wash, and that they had been arguing about this, and that Howard was acting violently.
She reached for a gun and fired in self-defense.
It was a miracle that Howard even survived the gunshot. He had been shot in the neck at very close range.
Brookey was charged in the shooting incident, but the case was dismissed.
After the shooting, Howard told the authorities he didn't want her prosecuted. He wanted them to drop the charges. Against advice from his family, his friends, and everyone else, he quickly reunited with Brookey.
Christine told them she didn't know why Brookey decided to take Howard back after his recovery. Detectives were interested in asking Brookey the same question. And before the interview with Christine was over, they got their chance.
Suddenly, Brookey-West came home. She was very charismatic and open and willing to talk to detectives.
Brookey-Lee-West told a very similar story to her mother, which was that she had shot him in self-defense. So those two accounts aligned with one another.
She kind of painted the picture that she had a very soft heart for him, that she loved him. She wanted to have that relationship succeed.
But according to Brookey, Howard seemed to have other plans.
After things had calmed down, Brookey worked that whole weekend before returning to Los Baños and learned that Howard was no longer there and had stolen $3,000 from her.
She said he had taken that money and gone with some associates to Reno and gambled that money away.
Brookey claimed she never saw her husband again. At the time, California investigators could not confirm her alibi, but without direct evidence of her involvement, they moved on to other possible suspects.
Howard had a record of having individuals that he wronged over his lifetime, and so they wanted to continue to see if there were any other potential persons of interest that they wanted to talk to.
They were very, very meticulous about this case. They assembled hundreds of interviews. They really did their homework, but the case just never came together.
That case files sat with the Tulare County Sheriff's Department for many months, going into years, as unsolved.
But 7 years later, Las Vegas detectives wonder if Brookey is responsible for the deaths of both her mother and her former husband.
Now, you've got two dead bodies of people that are closely associated with Brooke.
I was surprised and kind of eerily seeing similarities with what happened to Christine Smith and with what happened to Howard St. John.
Howard had a bag over his face, and so did Christine Smith. This was an undeniable pattern.
Now we have to look at Christine's death and find enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Brookey-West killed her mom.
While there is no statute of limitations on murder, the evidence isn't strong enough to charge Brookey-Lee-West in connection to the murder of Howard St. John. Crime scene technicians comb through the storage unit looking for any other evidence to tie Brookey to Christine's murder.
They did a very extensive examination of the cellophane and duct tape around the garbage can.
To my amazement, the crime scene investigator was able to find and recover a fingerprint that was on the inside of the plastic cellophane wrapping.
When they did an analysis of that fingerprint, they found out that it was Brookey-Lee-West's print.
That was a pretty good indication to us that Brookey at least had some hand in sealing the trash can.
I think that one day Brookey just snapped and attacked her mother because she hated her. She hated all the childhood trauma that she had been put through. She'd never had stability in her life, and Christine was going to pay the price for it.
Brookey-West is a diabolical individual. She didn't have a good relationship with her mom. She decided to kill her, and she was collecting those Social Security payments for about 2.5 years until she was discovered.
This case was about greed, hatred, and selfishness.
The fingerprint is a solid piece of evidence, but as Brookey's trial date approaches, Prosecutors wonder if it will be enough to convict her.
Did I feel comfortable going to trial the way it is? Absolutely not. How do I prove to a jury that this was done by criminal means with criminal intent?
On July 3, 2001, 5 months after Christine Smith's body was discovered, her daughter, Brookey-Lee-West, stands trial for murder.
A lot of cases you've got a murder weapon. A lot of cases you might have a confession. They didn't have any of that with Brookey.
Could Brookey have just simply panicked and disposed of her mother's body but didn't kill her?
The defense presented the idea that the body may have had some natural disease that no longer is viewable, and I had to concede that that was possible.
But the prosecution argues that a crucial detail about the crime scene proves Brookey's claim to be false.
There would be no reason to put a bag over someone's face if you just panicked.
I have a theory about all that. It's based on the Satanic Bible. I read it in order to see if there was a connection. By placing something over their eyes, that person is damned forever to be stuck in their own demons.
They bolster their case with the expert testimony of a forensic entomologist.
You would have expected within minutes, if not within the hour, blowflies would have colonized the body. But we don't have the blowflies. That gave an indication that Brookey must have had the garbage can ready, the cellophane wrapping ready, and the duct tape ready. The lack of blowflies suddenly gave me the option to, based on science, to argue that this was premeditated.
The body most likely went into this can very shortly after it died, or possibly even when it was still alive.
On July 19, 2001, the jury delivers its verdict.
A jury took just 2 hours to convict Brookey-Lee-West of first-degree murder. Brookey-Lee-West was sentenced to life in prison without parole.
I absolutely feel that justice was served in this case. She did it, and she needs to suffer the consequences.
There are certain crimes that, are beyond the pale, and this was certainly one of them.
How can anybody do that? Especially your own daughter, murder her mother that way? Shocking, really, even now.
6 years after the verdict, Brookey's case is featured on the 5th season of Snapped. But her story doesn't end there.
Nearly 10 years after Brookey-Lee-West was convicted of murder, something unbelievable happened at the state prison where Brookey was serving her life sentence.
July 20th, 2012. Brookey-Lee-West has been incarcerated since 2001, when she was convicted of murdering her mother, Christine Smith.
So Brookey's housed at Florence McClure Women's Facility in North Las Vegas. It's the prison for the state of Nevada for female prisoners. Brookey was by and large a model prisoner. She taught art classes. She was involved in pen pal groups, all kinds of things to try to be productive even though she was in prison. I think the structure of prison suited Brookey fairly well.
11 years after her conviction, it's Friday morning visiting day, and most inmates are preparing to see family members. But Brookey is occupied with something else.
Brookey had taken some art supplies and hid some art supplies. She managed to dye her hair, and she managed to store away some clothes from a guard.
She had changed her clothes and made her way all the way to the front entry, of the prison and was on the verge of walking out.
She was able to get through multiple checkpoints and was just stopped at the last one. She almost made it, but she was arrested trying to walk out the front door of Florence McClure.
She's now housed in a maximum security facility, and that she's no longer in the Nevada Women's Correctional Facility. Brookey-West is very crafty. She is cunning, sneaky, and I would not be surprised if she tries it again.
The story surrounding Brookey-Lee-West and her exploits have made her one of the most notorious killers in Las Vegas history. And while she remains in jail for the gruesome murder of her mother, authorities were never able to prove Brookey was responsible for the death of her husband.
She was a professional, high-income, attractive woman, a technical writer, someone that you would never, ever think was capable of this type of violence. But behind the facade was a very dangerous human being. The people who were close to Brookey were traumatized beyond belief by this whole series of events. And they just cumulatively came to learn that they were in the presence of a predator.
Howard St. John was in the wrong place in the wrong time with the wrong person.
Christine was colorful, she was chaotic, she was troubled, she was friendly, she was funny. We should remember Christine as a victim, despite all her flaws.
I really felt bad for Christine. Really, that's the whole thing, you know. She never deserved that at all.
I loved Christine. She was uniquely her, but everybody has good qualities and bad qualities, and I can accept them as they are. We all have good and bad in us. No one deserves to die at the hands of a murderer. No one.
An inheritance of $350,000. They lived a fantasy life. But dreams die hard when the money runs out, and that is when the nightmare began. We found a single gunshot wound to the forehead, no exit wound, confirming it was cold-blooded homicide. By the time we tracked Barbara to Virginia Beach, she was working at a 7-Eleven and still cashing her dead sister's checks. She told us she had no siblings, that she did not know a Deborah Burns. It is laughable. Can you believe that? This woman tried to erase her entire existence, but the truth has a way of coming to light. When we pressed her, the wall crumbled and she finally confessed. She spoke of the constant arguments, the demands for money, and a life that never provided a single moment of respite. On August 14th, the day of Deborah's 40th birthday, they had a violent confrontation. Barbara could not take it anymore. She retrieved a gun, walked into the bedroom they shared, and committed an unforgivable act. Then, she lived with her sister's body for 6 weeks, surrounded by cheap scents to hide the rot. To live alongside a corpse for 6 weeks, eating and sleeping just inches away, that is not the act of a sound mind. Barbara eventually pled guilty to manslaughter and received a 15-year sentence. A tragic end for a woman who once loved her sister more than anything. It is a heartbreaking lesson on human nature, on how circumstances can turn a kind heart into a devil. Some people spend a lifetime building something, only to destroy it in a single moment of weakness. The truth is, you never really know what is hidden behind closed doors of a home, until the smell of death finally starts to seep through the walls. Human beings are strange creatures. They kill for the most ridiculous reasons you could ever imagine. Sometimes it is over money, sometimes over pride, and sometimes just because they are bored with their own miserable existence. You sit across from them, you look into their eyes, and you realize they have stripped away every ounce of humanity they once possessed. My, you have to be kidding me. I tell you, this case was a tragedy, a cold, calculated betrayal that left a good man lying in a ditch, all because of a bunch of birds and a hollow heart. Fred Brown was a good man, not the kind who just says he is nice, but the kind who actually lives it. A veteran, a professor, a man who believed in his vows and his family. Everyone who knew him spoke of his kindness. But behind closed doors, in the quiet of a home in High Point, North Carolina, a dark rut was spreading. Patricia Brown, his wife, had decided she was tired of her life. She grew up with nothing, and when she found security with Fred, she thought she was set. But then the health issues came, the heart surgery, the fear of mortality, and then the birds, 50, 60 of them, filling the house with noise and chaos, draining the savings and driving a wedge between them. It is a pathetic sight, really, when you see a person choose exotic creatures over the man who stood by them for 20 years. Major Tom Shepard found Fred face down on the side of the road on an April morning in 1991. 2 shots to the head, 1 to the back, a footprint on his back. That is not a robbery. That is an execution. You do not get that close to a stranger unless you are putting them down like an animal. We looked at the family first. Naturally, that is just basic law enforcement. But Patricia sat there dry-eyed and cold, painting a picture of a perfect marriage. She had an alibi, and for a while, she slipped through the cracks. It was infuriating. You feel in your gut when you are looking at the devil, but the evidence, it just was not there. Then came the break from the unlikeliest place. A man named Leroy Wetzel, a lowlife with a criminal record and a violent temper, sitting in a jail cell in Pennsylvania. He had written it all down in letters to be opened only when he died, but he could not wait. He had been promised $30,000 to end Fred Brown's life, all because Patricia wanted the insurance money and the freedom to live her twisted life with her birds. Leroy, the ex-husband of Patricia's sister Sheila, thought he was a hitman. He lured Fred out to a lonely highway under the guise of car trouble, shot him in cold blood, and then had the audacity to call Patricia to confirm the job was done. When we interviewed Leroy, he was a small man with a long white beard and a history of nothing but trouble. He admitted it all. He told us how Patricia had hounded them for months. She was the architect. She was the one who pulled the strings. She was greedy and she was empty. When we finally brought her in, she did not even blink. She knew we were coming. She had built her own prison long before a jury ever put her in one. Fred Brown was a decent, honest man, the kind of person who makes the world better just by being in it. To see him extinguished because his wife couldn't handle a little debt and some domestic friction, it makes you sick. People talk about the sanctity of life, but then they turn around and trade it for cash and feathers. You have to be kidding me. That is the reality of murder. It is not some grand cinematic event. It is usually just small people doing incredibly ugly things. Fred did not deserve to die in a ditch. He deserved to live out his days with the people he loved. But greed is a powerful disease, and in the end, it claimed everyone involved. Patricia Brown died in prison, and the rest of them spent their lives behind bars. And for what? A few birds and a dream that was never going to come true. My. It is a dark, cold world sometimes, and I tell you, I have seen too much of it to ever truly be surprised by what a human being is capable of. The stillness of an Arlington morning in June of the year 2012 was shattered not by the bustle of a thriving immigrant community, but by a scene of incomprehensible brutality that would haunt even the most seasoned homicide detectives for years to come. When the elderly couple, Long Nguyen and Hong Lee, were discovered hog-tied and suffocated within the confines of their own bedroom closet. The initial investigation navigated a landscape of confusion and staged deception. The residence, found in disarray with traces of marijuana and a blue bandana prominently displayed, was meticulously dressed to mimic a gang-related robbery gone awry. A calculated attempt to misdirect law enforcement and mask the cold, methodical nature of the crime. For the responding officers, the sight was nothing short of a nightmare, a stark departure from the peaceful, hard-working life this Vietnamese immigrant family had built since arriving in the United States at the turn of the millennium. As detectives delved deeper, they confronted not only the visceral horror of the murder scene, but a complex web of spiritual desperation and human greed that had ensnared a family chasing an elusive American dream. The emotional core of this tragedy lies in the profound vulnerability of Long Nguyen and Hong Lee, a couple whose devotion to their family and heritage led them into a perilous reliance on a self-proclaimed spiritual advisor from Houston named Daphne Wright. Caught in the downward spiral of a failing commercial sewing business, the couple and their son-in-law, Chow Tran, sought solace in the ancient mysticism of their homeland, hoping to lift the perceived curse that plagued their financial fortune. This desperation, however, became the conduit for a predatory relationship, as Daphne Wright exploited their fears, demanding exorbitant sums for rituals that yielded no reprieve. As debts mounted to a staggering $250,000 to $280,000, the dynamic shifted from spiritual guidance to sinister coercion. Within the internal world of the victims, one can only imagine the suffocating dread they felt, caught between the crushing weight of their failing business and the perceived supernatural power of a woman who wielded influence over their very existence. They were not merely victims of a physical attack, but captives of psychological entrapment that dismantled their autonomy long before the fateful day they were silenced. The true, chilling nature of crime emerged years later, revealing that the architects of this murder were driven by the cold calculus of insurance payouts. It was a murder-for-hire plot, orchestrated by Daphne Wright and executed by Bobby Guillory and his nephew, Willie Guillory, who were motivated by their own crushing poverty and the promise of $10,000. The betrayal reached its peak in the allegations that Chow Tran himself provided the keys to the apartment, a revelation that leaves investigators and the community grappling with the haunting question of complicity. Throughout the trial, the narrative of the perpetrators shifted between shifting the blame to a mastermind and claiming extreme mental manipulation. Daphne Wright, convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life without parole, remained a cold, enigmatic figure who viewed human lives as mere assets in a ledger of debt. Yet, for the detectives who labored to bring justice to Long Nguyen and Hong Lee, the resolution remains incomplete. While the physical perpetrators were held accountable, the shadow of Chow Tran, who received immunity for his testimony, lingers as a painful reminder of the complexities of justice when dealing with the darkness of the human heart, leaving a community to mourn a couple whose lives were stolen by those they once trusted to safeguard their future. Human beings are strange creatures. They kill each other for the most ridiculous reasons you could possibly imagine. A marriage, a promise to love and honor, turn into a calculated execution ground. My. I tell you, you have to be kidding me if you think you can hide the darkness behind a mask forever. Bernie James was a man who knew the value of a life. He had been a Marine, a firefighter, a paramedic. He had walked through the fire to pull others from the flames. He was a father of 3, a man who had already suffered the crushing weight of losing his first wife to an aneurysm. He was vulnerable, searching for stability, looking for a way to keep his small world from falling apart. And into that void stepped Patricia James. She had a deep, jagged scar on her face, a physical manifestation of a childhood tumor, a mark that made her feel hideous and unwanted. Bernie, good-hearted man that he was, did not see the scar. He saw the person beneath. He fell for the illusion, and in doing so, he signed his own death warrant. Patty was a master of deception, a predator who understood exactly how to exploit human empathy. She crafted a persona of a devoted, loving mother, even adopting Bernie's children to seal the trap. But behind closed doors, the reality was a nightmare of screaming matches and manipulation. She was a woman who lived in a house of cards, constantly building lies to keep her world in motion. She would scam churches, invent illnesses for her own children, and isolate her family from the world. When Bernie finally realized the monster he had married and decided to leave, her fragile ego could not handle the rejection. That would have been her third divorce. To a woman like Patty, a divorce was not just a separation. It was a failure she could not permit. So she decided the only way to end the marriage was to end the man. The scene in Wilton Manors, Florida, on that night in March of 1987, was a stage performance. They found Bernie James dead in his vehicle, blunt force trauma to the side of his head, strangulation marks on his neck. Patty stood there, spinning a tale about a mysterious black man in his 20s with French accent who killed her husband for matches. It was an insult to the intelligence of any seasoned investigator. The scene was too clean. The physical evidence did not match the narrative. And the oil cans left by the car were a pathetic attempt to justify why he was out there in the first place. They always make mistakes. They always leave a thread for us to pull. As we dug deeper, the layers of her deception began to peel away like rot from a corpse. She was not just Patricia. She was Demi. She was a made-up flight attendant named TJ. She had convinced a man named Tim Ott, a gullible pawn in her sick game, that she was being abused and that Bernie was a child molester. She poisoned the well of his mind until he was willing to commit murder for her. They debated how to do it. They talked about grinding up seeds and Valium to poison him. They talked about shooting him. Ultimately, they chose a baseball bat and a piece of wire in an apartment, then moved the body back to the house to stage a robbery. When we brought Tim Ott in, the truth spilled out like water from a broken pipe. He was soft-spoken, intelligent, and utterly destroyed by the woman who had used him. He confessed to every detail, showing us the blood we found with luminol in his bedroom. He had been a puppet on a string, manipulated by a woman who had no conscience, no compassion, and absolutely no remorse. She viewed people as assets to be used, drained, and discarded. I have seen a lot of things in my time, but a woman who would invent multiple personalities to orchestrate the murder of her own husband is a special kind of evil. When we finally arrested her at her children's school, she did not fight. She simply shut down.
In
She looked at us
2007,
and claimed she did not remember
particularly
anything,
disturbing case
shifting
was
the blame
featured
to her
on the
imaginary
fifth
alter
season
ego.
of Snapped.
It is a classic move, the last refuge of a coward. She thought she was the smartest person in the room, but in the end, she was just another inmate in a life sentence. Bernie James deserved better. He was a man who wanted to protect, and he was killed by the one person who was supposed to be his sanctuary. It is a sobering reminder that when a person closes the door at night, nobody truly knows what goes on inside that house. You have to be careful who you let into your life, because sometimes the monster is already sitting at the dinner table. Human beings are strange creatures. They kill for the most ridiculous reasons you can imagine. Greed, jealousy, a dark desire to rewrite their own pathetic stories. You see the evidence, you look into the eyes of survivors, and you just have to ask yourself, what kind of person does this? My, you have to be kidding me. It was October 22nd, 1992. A quiet night in Stanton, Missouri, a place where the biggest excitement is usually the wind moving through the cornfields. But that night, the sky turned orange. A motorist saw a truck burning in a field, a sight that should never be in the middle of nowhere. When the firefighters finally doused the flames, they found a body in the passenger seat. It was a gruesome discovery, the kind that stains your memory forever. The truck was nothing but a frame, the victim unrecognizable, save for a few charred remnants, a gold chain, a ring, a watch, and a belt buckle from a hunting group. And then there was a rod in his leg, a metal pin. That was the breadcrumb that led us to Danny Coleman. Danny was a good man, a straight arrow, a guy who taught children how to handle firearms safely. He was a mechanical engineer, a hard worker who built a successful side business in flooring. He loved the outdoors, he loved his son, and he thought he had a happy home. He was wrong. The people closest to you are the ones with the best angle for the knife. Danny did not know he was sleeping next to a stranger. Karen Coleman played the part of the grieving widow, but she was a woman living a double life, drowning in drug addiction and tangled in a web of extramarital affairs. She was cold, calculated, and entirely devoid of the humanity that Danny possessed in abundance. The investigation stalled. It sat on a shelf for years, gathering dust while the truth waited in the dark. It took a deathbed confession from a convict named Larry Nolan 7 years later to blow the doors wide open. Larry had been rotting in prison, and he was bitter. He thought he was in love with Karen, that he was part of grand design, but in the end, he was just another pawn she discarded. He confessed to his cellmate that he had helped organize the hit on Danny for the insurance money. $50,000. That was the price tag on a man's life. It was a complex, twisted conspiracy. Larry pulled in James Cornhart, a local firefighter, to handle the execution. Cornhart brought in Stephen Mueller, and a shadow known only as Dozer. They lured Danny to a vacant house under the guise of an affair, beat him, and then, as Mueller eventually admitted, finished him off with 3 shots. They burned the truck in a remote field to hide the carnage. You have to be kidding me. They thought they were invisible. They were not. We had a fingerprint on a cellophane wrapper from a matchbook at the scene, locked away for 16 years. When we finally processed it against Cornhart, it was a perfect match. Science does not lie. People do. When we tapped the prison phones, we heard Cornhart asking an associate to dispose of the murder weapon, and a silencer made from a lawnmower muffler. I tell you, the stupidity of criminals is only matched by their cruelty. Karen eventually decided to save her own skin, blaming her actions on the drugs, claiming she was a new person now that she was sober. A likely story. She gave up her accomplices, traded information for a lighter sentence. She got 20 years. I was very disappointed in that. She was a murderer, too. She orchestrated the destruction of a man who loved her. She stood there and watched as her own son lost his father, all for a handful of cash. Danny Coleman was blindsided. He was an asset to this world, and he was stolen from it by people who were worth nothing. It took nearly 20 years to bring them to justice. But we got there. We got them. But you look at the cost, the time, the absolute waste of it all, and you have to wonder, is there any depth to which people will not sink? Some questions, I am afraid, have no good answers. On the morning of June the 10th, 2012, at 7:29 in the morning, that peaceful atmosphere was met with a sudden, anxious call to the emergency dispatchers. The voice on the other end belonged to Chow Tran, a 38-year-old Vietnamese immigrant who had made this country his home. He was calling to request a welfare check on his elderly in-laws, Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. His voice trembled with a mixture of confusion and concern as he explained that his family had gathered outside the apartment. They had noticed an open window, and things simply did not look right. 2 terrified stepped inside. They waited on the pavement, hoping for reassurance. When the responding officers arrived, they immediately sensed that this was different from a typical Sunday morning call. Families did not usually gather outside so early unless something was deeply amiss. Officer Weller, a dedicated officer with 14 years of experience, stepped through the threshold. The apartment was in complete disarray. Drawers were pulled open, items were scattered, and the silence inside was heavy. After checking the living room, the kitchen, and the bathroom, he entered the bedroom. Initially, the room seemed empty, but as Weller turned to leave, his flashlight caught faint hand smudges on the wall next to a very small closet. An instinct, honed by years of service, urged him to investigate. When he opened the closet door, the gravity of the tragedy unfolded. Inside were the elderly couple Long and Hong, bound with duct tape. There was no life left in them. The shock was immediate. For a seasoned police force, even those with decades of experience in homicide, this was a moment of profound sadness. Detective Stewart, who had spent 21 years investigating the city's darkest corners, arrived to find a scene that shook him to his core. The apartment had been ransacked, but the sheer force of the tragedy felt intensely personal. On the coffee table, Investigators found a plate of crushed prescription pills and a marijuana cigarette. Nearby, a light blue bandana was wrapped around a beer bottle. To the initial observer, these clues pointed directly toward active local gangs who were known to operate in the area. Yet, experienced detectives knew that sometimes a scene that appears too perfect is actually a stage. Long Nguyen and Hong, Lou had immigrated to the United States from Vietnam in the year 2000, carrying with them a deep love for their heritage and a dream of building a legacy for their three children and grandchildren. They established a commercial sewing business, relying on their son-in-law, Chow, to act as the English-speaking face of the company. For nearly a decade, their hard work paid off, eventually securing lucrative contracts with major commercial giants, including Disney. However, by the year 2011, the tide of fortune had turned. The contracts ended, and the business began to struggle in moments of great uncertainty. People often reach back to the ancient traditions of their homeland for comfort and guidance. For generations, many believed that spiritual advisors could offer protection, heal family rifts, and lift the heavy weight of bad luck. Searching through a local Vietnamese newspaper, Chow and his mother-in-law discovered an advertisement for a spiritual advisor located 250 miles away in Houston. The advisor, a woman named Daphne Wright, claimed she could remove obstacles and bring good fortune. Desperate to save the family business, Chow contacted her, and she agreed to perform a ritual. For a time, the family felt a renewed sense of hope. But instead of prosperity, a shadow began to fall over them. Behind the scenes, the financial demands of these spiritual services began to escalate. The family, driven by faith and fear, continued to pour their remaining resources into the rituals, running up a debt that ballooned to somewhere between $250,000 and $280,000. In the days following the discovery, detectives worked tirelessly. They learned that the cause of death for the sweet, hard-working couple was suffocation due to the extensive layers of duct tape. It was a heart-wrenching revelation for the family and the community who loved them. During the initial interviews, Chow explained that the family had been celebrating his father-in-law's birthday the night before, and the elderly couple had been dropped off at their home around 10:30. The family members all had airtight alibis, having spent the evening together playing cards until late. Then a new piece of information surfaced. Detective Stewart received a call from an insurance company disclosing that the deceased couple held life insurance policies totaling over $1 million, with Chow Tran named as a beneficiary. When questioned, Chow explained that the policies were intended to ensure the commercial sewing business could survive if anything happened to the founders. Without definitive evidence, police collected DNA and fingerprints from the family, hoping to find a match with the evidence left at the scene, particularly the marijuana cigarette. However, the results returned with no matches in the national database. The investigation slowed, and for 2 years, the case grew cold. The breakthrough came in the year 2015 through an unexpected turn of events. A young man named Willie Guillory, who was 16 years old at the time of the crime, was arrested for a felony involving the theft of a horse. Because he had become an adult and a felon, his DNA profile was entered into the system. It was an exact match for the DNA found on the marijuana cigarette at the crime scene. When detectives questioned Willie, the young man broke down and confessed. He revealed that he had not acted alone. His uncle, Bobby Guillory, had brought him along to Arlington on that fateful night in June of 2012. According to Willie, Bobby had been given a key to the apartment to stage a burglary, leaving the bandana, the pills, and the cigarette to mislead the police. Bobby Guillory was arrested in Katy, Texas, on 2 counts of capital murder. Faced with the evidence, Bobby also confessed, pointing the finger at the spiritual advisor, Daphne Wright. He explained that he had been struggling financially and was promised $10,000 by Daphne to carry out the deed. Daphne, acting as a spiritual lender, was determined to collect the massive debt owed to her. Knowing of the substantial life insurance policies, she had allegedly orchestrated the plan to recoup her money. When asked how she had obtained the key to the apartment, Bobby claimed she had received it directly from Chow Tran. The revelation of potential betrayal within the family stunned the investigators. On August 31st, 2016, detectives arrested Daphne Wright at her Houston home. Inside, they discovered detailed ledgers showing she charged tens of thousands of dollars for her spiritual services. As the legal proceedings moved forward, prosecutors sought to build an airtight case against the mastermind. In exchange for his full testimony, Chow Tran was offered immunity. During the trial in August of 2019, Chow testified about the immense control Daphne held over their minds and lives, portraying her as a greedy figure who would stop at nothing to secure her funds. He admitted to leaving the key under a mat on her instructions, while the defense argued that Chow was a complicit partner motivated by the insurance payout. The jury ultimately focused on the architect of the conspiracy. In September of 2019, Daphne Wright was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Willie and Bobby Guillory also faced justice for their roles. While the legal resolution left some questions about the full extent of family involvement unanswered, the dedication of the police force ensured that those who directly orchestrated and executed the tragedy were held accountable, bringing a quiet sense of closure and a reminder of the enduring power of truth to the Arlington community. The morning sun rose over quiet, tree-lined streets of Arlington, Texas, casting a golden warmth across the rooftops of a community built on hope, hard work, and the enduring strength of family. In this bustling city, where different cultures merge into a vibrant tapestry, one could find a thriving neighborhood where many families of Vietnamese heritage had built their homes. Among them, none were more cherished, more gentle, or more deeply respected than an elderly couple named Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. They had journeyed to the United States in the year 2000, carrying with them little more than their time-honored traditions, a few cherished belongings, and an abundance of love for their 3 children and grandchildren. They were people of peace, known throughout their neighborhood for their warm smiles and their gentle, generous spirits. Long and Hong believed wholeheartedly in the American dream, a dream they sought to build not just for themselves, but as a lasting legacy for the generations that would follow them. Upon settling in Texas, they poured their hearts into creating a commercial sewing business to help them navigate the unfamiliar landscape of a new country. They enlisted the help of their son-in-law, Chow Tran, a 38-year-old immigrant who possessed a strong command of the English language. Chow became the public face of the business, coordinating with contractors and managing the daily operations, while the elderly couple focused on the intricate artistry of their craft. For nearly a decade, their dedication bore fruit, culminating in a highly lucrative contract to manufacture garments for a major commercial giant, producing items for renowned names such as Disney. It was a time of abundance, laughter, and shared celebration. However, as the years progressed toward the year 2011, the winds of fortune began to shift. The prestigious contracts faded away, and the once thriving sewing business began to experience a challenging decline. In times of difficulty, the human spirit often seeks comfort in the beliefs and customs of its homeland. For thousands of years, ancient traditions had taught that spiritual harmony was deeply connected to earthly prosperity. When faced with hardships such as financial strain, families would sometimes seek the guidance of a spiritual advisor to bring protection, healing, and a renewal of good fortune. Hoping to restore their family's blessings, Chow Tran and his mother-in-law, Hong Lu, searched through a local Vietnamese newspaper. There, they discovered an advertisement for a spiritual advisor located in Houston, approximately 250 miles away. The advisor, a woman named Daphne Wright, claimed she possessed the unique ability to lift obstacles, dissolve negativity, and invite positive energy into the lives of those who sought her help. Encouraged by the promise of a brighter future, Chow made contact with her, and soon the family began to place their trust in her spiritual rituals, hoping for a turnaround in their business. Yet, as the months stretched into the year 2012, the family remained caught in a difficult financial cycle. Despite the mounting challenges, their love for one another never wavered. On a warm evening in early June, the family gathered together to celebrate Long's birthday. It was a joyful occasion filled with shared meals, friendly games of cards, and the bright laughter of grandchildren. Long and Hong smiled warmly, surrounded by the family they had worked so hard to nurture. When the party drew to a close around 10 o'clock in the evening, the elderly couple received a ride back to their apartment, their hearts full of the simple joy of being loved. The following morning, June 10th, 2012, began with an unusual silence. At 7:29 in the morning, emergency dispatchers received a call from Chow Tran. He expressed deep concern for his elderly in-laws, noting that they had not answered their door and that an open window at their apartment suggested something was amiss. When police officers arrived at the scene, they met the gathered family members waiting outside, too anxious to enter on their own. Officer Weller, a dedicated officer with 14 years of experience, was the first to enter the residence. The apartment was in complete disarray, showing clear signs of disturbance. Walking to the quiet rooms, Officer Weller called out, but received no response. After checking the living room, kitchen, and bathroom, only the bedroom remained. At first glance, the room appeared empty, but as the officer turned to leave, hand smudges on the wall next to a small closet caught his attention. With a cautious hand, he opened the closet door. Inside, the search reached a tragic end. Long Nguyen and Hong Lu were found, bound with duct tape, having succumbed to a senseless act of violence. The severity of the crime left even the most seasoned officers in a state of quiet shock. Detective Stewart, a veteran homicide investigator with 21 years of experience, arrived soon after, determined to bring clarity and justice to a scene that seemed to defy reason. At first, the physical evidence pointed toward gang-related activity. A light blue bandana wrapped around a beer bottle had been left on a table, alongside other items meant to suggest a robbery carried out by local youths. Yet, Detective Stewart experienced, I remained skeptical. The scene felt too staged, the clues too deliberately placed. It seemed as though someone had gone to great lengths to create an illusion, masking a much more personal and deeply rooted motive. As the investigation unfolded, detectives began to explore every possible avenue. They conducted interviews with over 50 neighbors, friends, and associates. They learned that the elderly couple was universally loved, with no known enemies. Seeking to understand the financial landscape of the family, investigators discovered that a substantial life insurance policy, valued at over $1 million, was in place, with Chow Tran named as one of the primary beneficiaries. When questioned, Chow explained that the policy was intended to ensure the continuity of the family business in the event of an untimely tragedy. He and his family provided consistent alibis for the night of the occurrence, and initial DNA samples collected from the scene did not match any family members or any profiles existing in the national databases. For more than 2 years, the case remained quiet, yet the dedication of the Arlington Police Department never faltered. The breakthrough finally arrived in October of the year 2015. A young man named Willie Guillory, who had been 16 years old at the time of the crime, was arrested on an unrelated felony charge in Houston, which required his DNA profile to be entered into the national database. Within days, the system identified a perfect match between Willie's DNA and the evidence recovered from the Arlington apartment years earlier. When brought in for questioning, the weight of the truth became too heavy for Willie to carry. He broke down and confessed, revealing that he had not acted alone. He had been accompanied by his uncle, Bobby Guillory, a 49-year-old man who had been struggling with severe financial difficulties. Willie explained that the entire event had been an orchestrated plan initiated by Daphne Wright, the spiritual advisor from Houston. Daphne had allegedly claimed that the family owed her a massive debt for her services, an amount totaling between $250,000 and $280,000. When the family was unable to pay, she had reportedly devised a plan to collect the funds through the couple's life insurance policies, hiring Bobby and Willie to carry out the act. In December of 2015, detectives arrested Bobby Guillory. Confronted with the evidence, Bobby also confessed, confirming that Daphne had promised him $10,000 to perform the task. He claimed that Daphne had provided him with a key to the apartment, which she had allegedly obtained from Chow Tran himself. Armed with this critical information, investigators focused their attention on Daphne Wright. A search of her Houston residence revealed extensive ledgers documenting enormous fees charged to various clients for spiritual services, while Daphne maintained her silence. Prosecutors recognized the need for decisive evidence to secure a conviction against the primary. Organizers of the plot, they reached an agreement with Chow Tran, offering him immunity in exchange for his full and detailed testimony. During the trial in August of the year 2019, Chow testified before the court, painting a vivid picture of family caught in a web of fear and perceived spiritual obligation. He described how they felt overwhelmed by the immense debt and the believed influence of the spiritual advisor. In September of 2019, after careful deliberation, the jury found Daphne Wright guilty of capital murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, bringing a profound sense of justice and closure to a long and complex journey. Though the path to truth was filled with challenges, the memory of Long Nguyen and Hong will remain a guiding light for all who knew them. Their lives, defined by love, unity, and an unwavering commitment to their family, left an indelible mark on the community of Arlington, serving as a lasting reminder of the strength of the human spirit and the enduring power of justice. The sun rose over Arlington, Texas, casting a bright, golden light across the bustling streets where the stories of countless families intertwined. In this vibrant city, where community was defined by perseverance and shared dreams, an extraordinary journey of hope, truth, and resilience was about to unfold. Among those who had come to build their lives in this promising land were Long Nguyen and Hong Lu, a deeply loved elderly Vietnamese couple who had arrived in the United States in the year 2000. They brought with them not only their cherished family, but also a rich tapestry of time-honored traditions, an unwavering work ethic, and an enduring belief in the American dream. Establishing a commercial sewing business, they worked side by side with their family members, including their son-in-law, Chow Tran, who often served as the public face of the business due to his fluent English. For many years, their dedication blossomed, earning them lucrative partnerships with major commercial giants, including Disney. However, as the global market shifted, the sewing business faced unexpected challenges, and the steady stream of contracts began to slow. Guided by their traditional cultural beliefs, the family sought a spiritual solution to protect their livelihood, hoping to find a path toward renewed prosperity and peace of mind. In their search for guidance, Chow Tran and his mother-in-law discovered an advertisement in a local Vietnamese newspaper for a spiritual advisor named Daphne Wright, based in Houston, approximately 250 miles away. Believing that her traditional ceremonies could help lift the heavy burdens hanging over their business, the family reached out to her. Initial consultations felt promising, and they invested deeply in the hope of a brighter future. Yet, as the months passed, the financial obligations tied to these intricate rituals grew exponentially, escalating into a massive debt of over $250,000. Unbeknownst to the gentle couple, a shadow of greed had begun to loom over their lives. When the debt became an insurmountable mountain, the demand for payment took a dark turn, culminating in a secret, tragic plot. On the morning of June 10th, 2012, after the family had celebrated Long's birthday the evening before, a call was placed to emergency services requesting a welfare check. Responding officers arrived at the apartment to find a scene staged to look like a chaotic burglary. But the ultimate discovery of the elderly couple brought a profound sadness to the entire community. Even veteran investigators, seasoned by years of challenging cases, were deeply moved by the loss of two such gentle souls who had never brought harm to anyone. The initial investigation faced numerous complex twists, including intentionally planted clues designed to mislead authorities into believing local gangs were responsible. A blue bandana, a discarded glass bottle, and other staged items were left behind to create a false trail. Despite these challenges, the investigators remained steadfastly dedicated to uncovering the absolute truth. For more than 2 years, the case remained quiet, but the dedicated officers never truly closed the book. The breakthrough came in the year 2015 through a remarkable twist of fate, involving a young man named Willie Guillory, whose DNA was entered into the national database following an unrelated felony offense. When his genetic profile matched the evidence recovered from the stage scene, the truth began to unravel. During a compassionate yet rigorous interview with law enforcement, Willie broke down and confessed to his involvement, revealing that he had been brought along by his uncle, Bobby Guillory. He explained that they had been hired by Daphne Wright, who had devised a plan to recover her funds through the family's substantial life insurance policies. Bobby Guillory was quickly apprehended and, facing the weight of his actions, also confessed, confirming that Daphne was a true architect of the scheme. As investigators dug deeper into the financial records, they uncovered ledgers detailing the massive sums Daphne charged her clients under the guise of spiritual protection. The subsequent trial in August of 2019 brought these complex events to light, offering the community a powerful lesson in the importance of transparency, the dangers of extreme superstition, and the ultimate triumph of justice over deception. Though some questions regarding individual responsibilities remained, the resolution of the case brought a profound sense of closure. It served as a lasting tribute to the memory of Long Nguyen and Hong Lu, reminding everyone that even in the face of temporary darkness, the light of truth, community solidarity, and dedicated public service will always prevail to restore peace and hope. The morning sun had barely managed to crest the horizon over Arlington, Texas, casting long, tentative shadows across the concrete parking lot of the apartment complex. The air was already heavy with the promise of summer heat, but inside the chest of Chow Tran, everything felt cold. He stood near the brick facade of the building, his hands trembling as he pressed his cellular telephone to his ear. The time was exactly 7 hours and 29 minutes on the morning of June 10th, 2012. When the emergency dispatcher answered, Chow felt his throat tighten. He explained, in his heavily accented but clear English, that he needed a welfare check on his elderly in-laws. The dispatcher, maintaining a calm and professional demeanor, asked for the names of the individuals inside the residence. Chow took a ragged breath and spelled the name of his father-in-law, stating the first name as Long and the last name as Wengyn, adding that the gentleman was 70-something years old at the time. As he spoke, a wave of panic washed over him. He looked toward his wife and his teenage son, who were standing closer to the apartment window. Chow cried out into the receiver, telling the dispatcher that his son and his wife had looked through the window and saw everything, fallen down in total disarray. The dispatcher assured him that officers were being sent to location immediately. Chow had initially sent his teenage son to knock on the front door, hoping for a simple explanation, perhaps that the elderly couple had merely overslept or failed to hear the telephone. But the repeated knocks had yielded nothing but an ominous silence. As more family members began to gather outside the apartment, their collective anxiety grew exponentially. They noticed that one of the windows was slightly open, and the interior appeared completely upended. Too terrified to venture inside on their own, they clustered together on the pavement, waiting for the arrival of the police. Officer Weller was the first to arrive at the scene. He had been dispatched quickly, expecting a routine welfare check, the kind that usually ended with an elderly resident reassuring the officer that they were fine. However, as soon as he pulled up and saw the entire family standing outside the apartment complex at such an early hour, he knew the situation was atypical. It was unusual to receive welfare checks so early in the morning, and the palpable fear radiating from the gathered crowd immediately heightened his instincts. Stepping up to the front door, Officer Weller noticed the immediate signs of forced entry and disruption. Upon entering the residence, his eyes swept across the living room, noting the classic telltale signs of a burglary. The apartment was in complete disarray. Furniture was moved, items were scattered, and there was an eerie silence that hung over the rooms. He began calling out into quiet space, his voice echoing off the walls, but no answer came. He checked the living room, the kitchen, and the bathroom, finding them completely empty. The only space left to inspect was the master bedroom. He walked in, his focus entirely placed on locating the missing couple and ensuring their safety, rather than analyzing the specific state of the room. At first glance, the bedroom appeared empty as well. Thinking that perhaps the family had simply gone out for an early morning walk and that everything would turn out fine, Officer Weller turned around to exit the bedroom. As he did, the beam of his flashlight caught the wall next to a very small closet. There, clearly visible against the paint, were distinct hand smudges. A sudden hesitation seized him. Every instinct inside of him screamed not to open that door. A deep gut feeling warning him of the horror that lay beyond. Yet, knowing he would not be doing his job if he left the closet unchecked, he reached out, gripped the handle, and pulled the door open. Inside the cramped space lay the bodies of Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. They were hog-tied with heavy duct tape, and their heads and mouths were wrapped completely in the gray adhesive material. Blood was splattered across the interior of the closet. In that split second, Officer Weller knew they were dead. With 14 years of law enforcement experience, it was undeniably the most gruesome and brutal scene he had ever witnessed. Shock rendered him temporarily speechless. He walked out of the bedroom, past the scattered belongings, and stood motionless in the middle of the living room. It took a few moments to regain his composure before he could finally operate his radio to request a supervisor and the crime scene unit. When the veteran homicide investigators arrived, including a detective with 21 years of experience in the department, they were profoundly rattled by the sheer violence of the crime. The physical evidence suggested the elderly couple had been beaten with some kind of blunt force object before being placed in the closet. The scene was incredibly violent and bloody, with evidence showing the victims had desperately grabbed at the walls as they were being forced. Into the back room. In the living room, compact discs were ransacked and furniture was thrown about. The initial theory that crossed the minds of the investigators was a robbery gone wrong. However, the extreme nature of the violence seemed entirely disproportionate for a simple theft. The detective noted significant blunt force trauma to the forehead of the victims, with markings that suggested the potential use of a tool like a hammer. The sheer volume of duct tape used to bind the faces of the elderly couple all the way up to their foreheads indicated a cold, calculated intent to kill. The community was left wondering who could be so heartless as to murder such a gentle, harmless couple who had never bothered anyone. Long Nguyen and Hong Lu had immigrated to the United States from Vietnam in the year 2000, seeking the American dream for themselves, their 3 children, and their grandchildren. They settled in Arlington, Texas, a city in Tarrant County known for its diverse cultural tapestry, including a substantial and well-established Vietnamese community that had grown significantly since the late 1970s. The couple established a commercial sewing business, enlisting the help of their son-in-law, Chow Tran, who spoke the best English and served as the public face of the enterprise, dealing directly with contractors. For nearly a decade, the business flourished, eventually securing a lucrative contract to manufacture garments for a major commercial giant, including well-known entities like Disney. But by the year 2011, their good fortune began to evaporate. They lost the Disney contract, and the business entered a severe downward spiral. Facing bankruptcy, the family turned to traditional spiritual beliefs for protection and healing. In Asian culture, many believe in praying to traditional gods of luck and wealth to protect a business. When facing major life crises, such as divorce, legal trouble, or financial ruin, some families seek the guidance of a spiritual advisor. Searching through a local Vietnamese newspaper, Chow Tran and his mother-in-law discovered an advertisement for a spiritual advisor based in Houston, approximately 250 miles away. The woman advertised herself as someone who could lift bad curses and apply good fortune. Believing she could save their failing business, Chow contacted her and traveled to Houston for a consultation. The advisor performed a ritual, filling the family with renewed hope. However, 1 year later, that hope was utterly shattered by the murders in the Arlington apartment. As the forensic team processed the bloody crime scene, they uncovered items that seemed out of place. On the coffee table sat a plate of crushed prescription pills, arranged as if for consumption, alongside a marijuana cigarette. More significantly, investigators discovered a blue bandana wrapped tightly around a beer bottle. Arlington had a history of active Vietnamese gangs known for extorting local businesses. The light blue bandana immediately caused a homicide team to consult with the gang unit. At first glance, it appeared as though a gang had left their colors behind as a calling card to claim responsibility for the crime. Yet, as the veteran investigators analyzed the scene further, skepticism began to grow. Most local gang members did not commit crimes of this specific, highly personalized nature. The scene began to feel too perfect, too deliberately set up. The detectives began to theorize that the entire burglary and gang presence had been staged to mislead the police. This suspicion led investigators to examine potential financial motives closer to home. They learned of a substantial life insurance policy, totaling at least $1 million, and looked into the beneficiaries. One of the primary beneficiaries was Chow Tran himself. On June 13, 2012, detectives met with Chow at the police station to question him about the business and the large insurance policy. Chow explained that the policy was intended to ensure the continuity of the commercial sewing business if a family member were to pass away. When questioned about his movements on the night of the murders, Chow provided an airtight alibi, stating that the family had gathered for a birthday party, playing cards until past 10 o'clock in the evening before returning home. The police collected DNA and fingerprint samples from Chow and the other family members, comparing them to the items found at the scene. While they successfully extracted a DNA profile from the marijuana cigarette left on the coffee table, the results provided no immediate answers. The profile did not match any family members, nor did it generate a hit in the federal DNA database, known as CODIS. This suggested the perpetrator might be an adult with no prior felony record, or perhaps a minor whose profile was not legally permitted to be in the system. With no further leads, the case went completely cold for more than 2 years. The breakthrough came unexpectedly in the year 2015. A young man named Willie Guillory was arrested for stealing a horse in Houston, which constituted a felony in the state of Texas. Because of this felony conviction, his DNA was legally entered into the CODIS database. At the time of the murders in 2012, Willie had been only 16 years old, which was why his profile had never appeared during the initial investigation. The system flagged a perfect match between Willie Guillory and the DNA found on the marijuana cigarette at the crime scene. On October 17, 2015, detectives brought Willie in for questioning under the pretext of a parole violation. When presented with the absolute certainty of the DNA evidence placing him inside the Arlington apartment, the young man broke down in tears and confessed. He stated that he had been present, but insisted he had not acted alone. Willie revealed that in 2012, his 49-year-old uncle, Bobby Guillory, had enlisted his help for a job in Arlington. On June 9, 2012, the two made the 3-hour drive from Houston. According to Willie, his uncle possessed a physical key to the apartment, allowing him to enter effortlessly and stage the scene. They threw items around, left the beer bottle, the blue bandana, the pills, and the marijuana cigarette specifically to make the crime look like the work of a local street gang. When the elderly couple returned home, Willie ran toward the door to prevent the woman from escaping or screaming, while Bobby grabbed the gentleman and began beating him with a blunt object to incapacitate him. Once the victim stopped resisting, Bobby used a duct tape to bind them securely before moving them into the bedroom closet, where they were abandoned. When asked for a motive, Willie dropped a bombshell. The entire event was a murder-for-hire plot orchestrated by a spiritual advisor named Daphne Wright, who was a close associate of his uncle. Willie claimed Daphne wanted the couple dead because they owed her a massive amount of money and refused to pay. Armed with this information, the police charged Willie with murder and turned their attention to locating Bobby Guillory and investigating Daphne Wright. Daphne operated a popular spiritual advising business in Houston, claiming to bring wealth and remove curses for various families. When detectives attempted to interview Chow Tran regarding his connection to Daphne, Chow immediately directed them to his attorney, signaling to investigators that he was aware the police were closing in on the Houston connection. On December 16, 2015, detectives located and arrested 52-year-old Bobby Guillory at his residence in Katy, Texas, charging him with 2 counts of capital murder. Faced with search warrant for his DNA, Bobby also confessed. He explained that he had no prior criminal history, but had been desperate for money after being laid off from his job. Daphne Wright had allegedly offered him $10,000 to carry out the deed. Bobby described Daphne as a spiritual loan shark. Chow Tran and Hong had accumulated a massive debt to her, ranging between $250,000 and $280,000, because they kept purchasing her services on credit, despite the business continuing to fail. When Daphne demanded payment, the family could not produce the funds. Knowing that Chow and his wife stood to inherit a massive payout from the life insurance policies, Daphne allegedly devised a plan to eliminate the elderly couple so the debt could be settled using the insurance proceeds. Crucially, when investigators asked Bobby how Daphne had obtained the key to the apartment, Bobby stated that Daphne had received it directly from Chow Tran. This revelation deeply unsettled the detectives, who had maintained a supportive relationship with Chow throughout the long investigation. On August 31st, 2016, detectives executed an arrest warrant for Daphne Wright at her Houston home. Inside the residence, they discovered a detailed business ledger revealing that she routinely charged clients tens of thousands of dollars for spiritual services and curses, while Daphne remained completely cold and uncooperative, demanding her attorney. Her husband maintained her innocence, claiming total ignorance of any criminal plot. In an effort to secure a conviction against the primary conspirators, prosecutors ultimately made a difficult decision. They offered Chow Tran full immunity from prosecution in exchange for his absolute cooperation and truthful testimony against Daphne, Bobby, and Willie. Chow accepted the agreement. He testified that the family had grown terrified of Daphne's alleged spiritual powers, believing she could place a deadly curse on them if the debt remained unpaid. He even claimed that his mother-in-law had initially suggested sacrificing herself so the family could collect the insurance money to satisfy Daphne, a claim that investigators found entirely hard to believe. Daphne Wright's capital murder trial commenced on August 26, 2019. Chow took the witness stand, portraying Daphne as an insatiably greedy individual who masterminded the entire plot and forced his hand. The defense fiercely attacked Chow's credibility, noting the complete lack of physical documentation regarding the massive debt and pointing out that the entire $850,000 insurance payout had gone directly into Chow's pocket. They argued that Chow was utilizing the narrative of a mystical mastermind purely to escape accountability for an inside job. In September of 2019, the jury delivered its verdict, convicting Daphne Wright of capital murder. She received the ultimate penalty of life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Willie and Bobby Guillory were likewise held accountable for their physical roles in the tragedy. Although the investigators remained frustrated that Chow Tran walked away free due to the immunity agreement, they found solace in the fact that the actual perpetrators who carried out the violence were removed from society. The long journey for justice demonstrated that even the most calculated attempts to obscure the truth would eventually fail, leaving the community to remember the gentle legacy of the 2 lives lost. The morning sun rose over the city of Arlington, Texas, casting a warm, golden glow across the quiet suburban neighborhoods. It was the 10th of June, 2012, a day that began like any other Sunday, filled with the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant, cheerful chirping of birds. In this vibrant corner of the Lone Star State, communities of different cultures lived side by side, sharing their dreams, their hard work, and their hopes for a brighter future. Among them was a large and close-knit Vietnamese community, whose members had spent decades building new lives while holding fast to the beautiful traditions of their homeland. At 7:29 in the morning, the peaceful silence of the early hours was broken by a phone call to the emergency dispatchers. On the other end of the line was Chow Tran, a 38-year-old Vietnamese immigrant, his voice trembling with a mixture of confusion and growing concern. He was calling to request a welfare check on his elderly in-laws, Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. When asked for their names, he carefully spelled them out, explaining that his father-in-law was a gentleman in his 70s. Chow explained to the dispatcher that his wife and son had gone to the apartment to check on the couple, only to find the window open and things inside seemingly out of place. Too anxious to step inside themselves, the family waited on the pavement, looking toward the building with heavy hearts, praying that everything would be all right. Officer Weller, a dedicated member of the Arlington Police Department, was the first to arrive on the scene. With years of experience serving the community, he knew that an early morning welfare check with an entire family waiting anxiously outside was highly unusual. Stepping through the front door of the apartment, he immediately noticed signs of a disturbance. The living room was in disarray, with compact discs scattered across the floor and furniture moved out of place. Calling out for the couple, he was met only with silence. Determined to find them, Officer Weller walked through the quiet hallway. He checked the living room, the kitchen, and the bathroom, finding no one. Finally, he entered the bedroom. At first glance, the room appeared empty, and a wave of relief washed over him, making him think the sweet elderly couple had simply gone out for an early morning walk in the fresh Texas air. But as he turned to leave, his flashlight caught the faint outline of hand smudges on the wall next to a small closet door. A sudden instinct stopped him in his tracks. Taking a deep breath, he gently opened the door. Inside, the tragic reality unfolded. The beloved elderly couple, Long Nguyen and Hong Lu, lay still. The scene was incredibly difficult for the responding officers, leaving even a veteran police force deeply shaken. Officer Weller stepped back into the living room, momentarily unable to speak, before gathering his strength to call for backup and a crime scene investigation unit. When the homicide investigators arrived, led by detectives with over 2 decades of experience, they found themselves facing a deeply perplexing mystery. The apartment had been staged to look like a robbery gone wrong, complete with a blue bandana wrapped around a beer bottle, a marijuana cigarette, and crushed prescription pills on the coffee table. To a casual observer, these items suggested the involvement of local street gangs. However, the detectives quickly realized that the scene was almost too perfect, as if someone had deliberately left a trail of clues to lead them astray. They suspected that the entire scene had been carefully arranged to cover up a much more personal and calculated plan. Long Nguyen and Hong, Lu had immigrated to the United States from Vietnam in the year 2000, bringing with them a deep love for their family and an unwavering commitment to their cultural heritage. Settling in Arlington, they had established a commercial sewing business, pouring their hearts into making high-quality garments. For a long time, their hard work paid off, and they even secured a prestigious contract to manufacture items for a prominent global entertainment giant. They were highly respected, generous, and loved by everyone who knew them, living a life free of enemies or conflict. However, by the year 2011, the tides of fortune had turned. The loss of their major manufacturing contract placed an immense financial strain on the family business. In their search for hope and a way to restore their livelihood, Long and Hong looked to the ancient, traditional beliefs of their homeland. They believed in the power of spiritual guidance to lift the heavy burdens of bad luck and protect their family from bankruptcy. Searching through a local Vietnamese newspaper, Chow Tran and his mother-in-law, Hong Lu, discovered an advertisement for a spiritual advisor named Daphne Wright, who operated out of Houston, 250 miles away, promising to dispel curses and bring abundant good fortune to those in need. Daphne seemed like the answer to their prayers. Chow traveled to Houston for a consultation, and the family felt a renewed sense of hope after the first spiritual ritual was performed. Yet, behind the facade of spiritual healing lay a dark and manipulative reality. As the months passed, the family's business did not recover, but Daphne continued to perform increasingly expensive rituals on credit. Over time, the family's debt to her ballooned to a staggering sum between $250,000 and $280,000. Terrified of the spiritual consequences of failing to pay a woman they believed possessed immense supernatural powers, Chow and Hong found themselves trapped in a web of fear and manipulation. During the investigation, detectives discovered that the deceased couple held substantial life insurance policies, totaling over $1 million, with Chow Tran named as a beneficiary, while Chow and his family had airtight alibis for the night of the tragedy. Having spent the evening playing cards together until late, the financial connection caught the attention of the authorities. For 2 long years, the case remained cold, leaving the family and the community waiting for answers. But justice has a way of finding its path, even when the trail seems to have gone quiet. In the year 2015, a breakthrough occurred when a young man named Willie Guillory was arrested in Houston on an unrelated felony charge. Because Willie had transitioned from a minor to an adult with a felony conviction, his DNA profile was entered into a national database. To the astonishment of the investigators, his DNA perfectly matched the sample recovered from the marijuana cigarette left at the stage crime, seen in Arlington. When brought in for questioning, Willie, who had been only 16 years old at the time of the crime, quickly broke down and confessed. He revealed that he had been led into the plan by his uncle, Bobby Guillory, a 49-year-old man who was struggling financially after being laid off from his job. Bobby had been recruited by Daphne Wright, who had offered him $10,000 to carry out the deed. Daphne, desperate to recoup the massive debt she claimed the family owed her, had devised a plan to eliminate the elderly couple so that the insurance policies could be collected and used to pay her back. In December of 2015, detectives arrested Bobby Guillory, who also confessed to his role, expressing deep remorse and admitting that he had acted out of desperation and fear. He confirmed that Daphne was a true mastermind behind the entire plot, dictating every step of the plan, including how to stage the apartment to look like a gang-related robbery. In August of 2019, Daphne Wright was brought to trial. The courtroom heard powerful testimony detailing how she had used manipulation, fear, and greed to control the lives of others, turning a family's search for spiritual comfort into a heartbreaking tragedy. Although the defense argued against the credibility of the witnesses, the jury saw through deception. Daphne was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that she could no longer harm others. The story of Long Nguyen and Hong Lu is a deeply moving reminder of the strength of family, the search for the American dream, and the ultimate triumph of justice. While the community of Arlington was deeply saddened by the loss of two of its sweetest and most hard-working members, the dedication of the police force and the power of truth brought a sense of peace and resolution to those they left behind. Their memory lives on the hearts of their children and grandchildren, serving as an inspiring testament to the enduring power of love, hope, and the human spirit. In the heart of Texas, where the vast sky stretches out like an endless blue canvas over the flat prairie, the city of Arlington hummed with the quiet industry of thousands of families striving to build their lives. Among them, the neighborhood stood as a vibrant testament to the enduring human spirit of migration and renewal. For many who arrived after the historic events of 1975 and the subsequent waves of families who followed in the late 80s and 90s, this warm corner of the world became a sanctuary. It was a place where old traditions met new opportunities, where the rich aroma of traditional noodle soup drifted from open kitchen windows to mingle with the sweet scent of Texas pecan trees. In the year 2000, Long Nguyen and his beloved wife, Hong Lu, chose to pack up the remnants of their lives in Vietnam and embark on a grand journey across the ocean. They did not come merely for themselves. They came to plant deep roots for their 3 children and their growing circle of grandchildren. Long was a man of quiet dignity, with gentle eyes that had seen decades of change, and a smile that could instantly put a stranger at ease. Hong was the vibrant, beating heart of the household, a woman whose culinary skills were legendary among their neighbors and whose devotion to her family knew no bounds. They brought with them very little in the way of material wealth, but they possessed an abundance of hope, a shared work ethic, and a deep-seated belief in the American dream. Upon settling in Texas, they did what so many industrious families do. They looked to their own hands to carve out a living. They established a commercial sewing business, setting up rows of heavy industrial sewing machines in a modest workshop. To help manage the daily operations, they enlisted the support of their son-in-law, Chow Tran, a sharp 38-year-old man who spoke fluent English and possessed a natural knack for business negotiation. Chow quickly became the public face of the enterprise, representing the family in discussions with contractors, handling shipping logistics, and navigating the complex landscape of local commercial agreements. For nearly a decade, their dedication bore magnificent fruit. The gentle, rhythmic hum of the sewing machines became the soundtrack to their success. They secured lucrative contracts to manufacture beautiful, high-quality garments for some of the largest commercial giants in the world, including beloved entertainment brands like the Disney Enterprise. During those golden years, their home was filled with laughter, abundance, and the warmth of family that had successfully bridged 2 distinct worlds. They were respected figures in the local Vietnamese community, always ready to offer a helping hand, a kind word, or a traditional blessing to those starting on their own paths. Chapter 2, The Gathering Shadows. However, the tides of commerce are as unpredictable as the autumn winds. By the year 2011, the steady stream of prosperity began to falter. A major manufacturing contract was lost to overseas competitors, and the family workshop, once bustling with activity and joy, grew increasingly quiet. The financial strain began to weigh heavily on the family, casting a long shadow over the elderly couple. In times of deep uncertainty, people often reach back to the ancient wisdom of their ancestors for comfort and guidance. For generations, traditional Eastern beliefs held that the universe operates on a delicate balance of spiritual energies. When bad luck persists, it is often viewed not merely as a series of unfortunate events, but as a spiritual imbalance or a lingering cloud of negative energy that must be carefully cleared. Long and Hong, holding fast to the spiritual heritage of their homeland, believed that inviting a spiritual advisor to perform a cleansing ritual could restore harmony to their lives and revitalize their fading business. It was Chow Tran and his mother-in-law, Hong, who eventually found an advertisement in a local Vietnamese language newspaper. The notice spoke of a prominent spiritual advisor located in Houston, a bustling metropolis situated roughly 250 miles away. The advisor, a 44-year-old woman named Daphne Wright, claimed to possess the rare ability to lift heavy curses, bestow blessings of prosperity, and align the spiritual forces of luck and fortune for those in dire need. Hoping to find a beacon of light in their dark times, Chow made the long drive to Houston to consult with Daphne in her beautifully decorated office. Filled with the soothing scent of incense and the gentle chiming of brass bells, Daphne welcomed him with open arms. She performed elaborate rituals, burning sacred papers and chanting prayers for their success. For a short time, Chow and Hong felt a renewed sense of hope, believing that their financial struggles would soon be a thing of the past. Yet, as the months rolled by, the business did not recover. Instead of stepping back to reassess, the family found themselves caught in a cycle of desperation. Daphne insisted that the negative energies surrounding their business were exceptionally stubborn, requiring increasingly complex, expensive rituals to dismantle. Trusting in her perceived spiritual authority, Chow and Hong continued to pour their remaining funds into her services, running up a staggering debt that eventually ballooned to between $250,000 and $280,000. They were trapped in a web of spiritual promises and financial ruin, completely unaware of the dark design's quiet greed was weaving around them. Chapter 3: A Morning of Devastation. The morning of June 10th, year 2012, began with a clear, pale blue sky over Arlington, but for the family of Long and Hong, it would forever be remembered as the day the light went out. At precisely 7:29 in the morning, emergency dispatchers received an urgent, trembling phone call from Chow Tran. He requested a welfare check on his elderly in-laws, explaining that they had not answered their phone and that his family was growing deeply concerned. When the responding officers arrived at the quiet apartment complex, they found several family members gathered outside, their faces pale with anxiety. The officers noticed that one of the apartment windows was slightly ajar, which was highly unusual for the security-conscious elderly couple. Officer Weller, a seasoned officer with 14 years of experience, was the first to cross the threshold. Inside, the apartment was in complete disarray, bearing the typical, chaotic hallmarks of a burglary. Drawers were pulled out, belongings were scattered across the floor, and furniture was overturned. The officer called out, his voice echoing to the quiet rooms, but only silence answered. He checked the kitchen, the living room, and the bathroom, finding them completely empty. Finally, Officer Weller entered the bedroom. At first glance, the room appeared vacant, but as he turned to leave, his flashlight caught several smudges on the wall next to a small, unassuming closet door. A deep, instinctual hesitation washed over him, a quiet warning from within. Steeling his resolve, he gently pulled the closet door open. The sight that greeted him was one of profound tragedy. Restricting his description to respect the dignity of the departed, the officer discovered the gentle elderly couple, Long and Hong, bound tightly with heavy gray duct tape. It was immediately clear that they had suffered a violent assault and had passed away. Weller, despite his years of training, was left momentarily speechless by the sheer heartlessness of the act. He walked out into the living room, took a deep breath, and called for the homicide investigators and the crime scene unit. Chapter 4: the stage scene in the cold years. Detective Stewart, a veteran homicide investigator with 21 years on the force, arrived shortly after. He stood in the apartment, looking at the chaotic scene. The level of violence directed toward a sweet, harmless elderly couple who had no known enemies seemed completely senseless. As the crime scene technicians meticulously gathered evidence, they discovered several items that felt oddly out of place. On the coffee table lay a plate of crushed prescription pills and a discarded marijuana cigarette. Nearby, a light blue bandana was wrapped carefully around a glass beer bottle. At first glance, these items strongly suggested the involvement of local youth gangs, who were known to occasionally use specific colors as a calling card. However, Detective Stewart's seasoned instincts told him to look closer. The scene felt almost too perfect, as if someone had deliberately placed these items to tell a specific story to the police. He suspected the burglary and the gang signs were a sophisticated staging attempt designed to divert attention away from the true perpetrator. The subsequent autopsy at the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's office revealed a grim truth. The couple had not perished from physical trauma, but had suffocated due to the restrictive layers of duct tape applied to their faces. The sheer cruelty of the act suggested a deeply personal motive rather than a random, chaotic robbery. During the initial interviews, Chow Tran acted as the primary spokesperson for the grieving family, explaining that they had all been celebrating his father-in-law's birthday the evening before. He painted a picture of a close-knit, loving family, though he admitted the sewing business had been struggling. Shortly after the funeral, a standard notification from an insurance company revealed that Long and Hong carried a substantial life insurance policy worth at least $1 million, with Chow Tran listed as a primary beneficiary. While this raised temporary questions, Chow explained that the policy was intended to ensure the continuity of their business, without any concrete evidence, fingerprints, or matching hereditary codes from the crime scene. The investigation eventually stalled. The years stretched on, and the tragic files were placed into the cold case archives, waiting for a single spark of truth to light the way. Chapter 5, The Catalyst of Justice. That spark arrived unexpectedly in October the year 2015. The path of justice is often winding, and in this case, it began with an unusual incident involving the theft of a horse in Houston. A young man named Willie Guillory was arrested for the offense, which constituted a felony in the state of Texas. Because of his felony conviction as an adult, his unique genetic profile was entered into the national database for the first time. Within days, the system flagged a miraculous match. The hereditary markers from the discarded marijuana cigarette found at the Arlington crime scene in 2012 belonged to Willie Guillory. At the time of the murders, Willie had been a mere 16-year-old youth with no prior adult record, explaining why his profile had never appeared in the database during the initial investigation. Detectives quickly brought Willie in for questioning, faced with the undeniable scientific evidence of his presence at the scene. The young man broke down in tears and confessed. He revealed that he had not acted alone. He had been led to Arlington by his uncle, Bobby Guillory, a 52-year-old man who was struggling financially at the time. More importantly, Willie pointed to the true architect of the tragedy, Daphne Wright, the spiritual advisor from Houston. Willie explained that Daphne was furious over the massive, unpaid debts owed to her by the family. She had approached Bobby Guillory, offering him $10,000 to carry out a dark deed to ensure she would collect her money. Through the couple's life insurance policies, Daphne had provided Bobby with a key to the apartment, which allowed the men to slip inside and stage the scene before the couple returned home. Chapter 6, The Verdict of Truth. Armed with this explosive information, detectives traveled to Katy, Texas, to arrest Bobby Guillory. When confronted, Bobby confirmed his nephew's story, expressing deep remorse for his role in the crime. He admitted that they had been desperate for money and had allowed themselves to be used as pawns by Daphne Wright, whom he described as a ruthless, greedy mastermind who demanded her money at any cost. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. When asked how Daphne had obtained the key to the apartment, Bobby stated that she had received it directly from Chow Tran himself. The revelation of Chow's complicity sent shockwaves through the department. The financial records subpoenaed by the state showed that shortly after tragedy, the sewing business had closed and Chow had purchased a beautiful new home. It became clear that Chow, trapped under the absolute spiritual and psychological control of Daphne, had agreed to a horrific arrangement. He claimed to his attorney that his mother-in-law, Hong, had offered herself as a sacrifice to save the family from Daphne's spiritual wrath. But investigators viewed this claim as an absurd attempt to justify a terrible betrayal driven by fear and financial greed. To secure a conviction against Daphne Wright, the individual who had orchestrated and funded the entire plot, prosecutors made a difficult choice. They offered Chow Tran immunity from prosecution in exchange for his full, detailed testimony against the others. The trial began on August 26, year 2019. On the witness stand, Chow portrayed Daphne as an incredibly manipulative and commanding figure who ruled her clients with fear, using their deep cultural beliefs and spiritual curses to extort hundreds of thousands of dollars. Though the defense argued that Chow was the true beneficiary of the insurance money and was using Daphne as a scapegoat, the jury ultimately saw through the deception. In September of the year 2019, the jury returned a verdict of guilty. Daphne Wright was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Bobby and Willie Guillory likewise faced the legal consequences of their actions. While the legal battle concluded with the mastermind behind bars, the heavy weight of the tragedy remained. For the investigators who had dedicated years to seeking justice for Long and Hong, the immunity granted to Chow Tran was a difficult pill to swallow. Yet, as the community looked back on the lives of the gentle elderly couple, they chose to remember them not by the darkness of their final moments, but by the warmth, love, and enduring spirit community they had brought with them across the sea. The story of their journey stood as a powerful reminder of the precious nature of family, the danger of unchecked greed, and the ultimate, inescapable power of truth to shine light into the deepest dark. In the quiet expanse of Tarrant County, Texas, the city of Arlington stands as a vibrant tapestry of cultures. By the late 20th century and into the early years of the 21st century, a flourishing Vietnamese immigrant community had woven its dreams into the very fabric of the city. Among those who arrived with hopes as vast as the Texas sky were Long Nguyen and his beloved wife, Hong Le. They had immigrated from Vietnam in the year 2000, seeking what so many before them had sought, a peaceful, prosperous legacy for their 3 children and grandchildren. They were a sweet, hard-working, and generous couple, beloved by their neighbors, and deeply rooted in their cultural heritage. To build their piece of the American dream, they established a commercial sewing business, relying on the help of their family, including their articulate son-in-law, Chow Tran, who often served as the public face of the enterprise because of his strong command of the English language. For nearly a decade, their efforts bore fruit, culminating in a highly lucrative contract to manufacture garments for a major commercial giant, a brand as universally recognized as Disney. Yet, as the year 2011 arrived, the tides of fortune began to shift. The contract was lost, and the family business began a slow, agonizing decline. Facing financial distress, the family turned to traditional beliefs in search of a solution. For thousands of years, many cultures have looked to spiritual practices to protect wealth and invite good fortune. Desperate to lift what they feared was a persistent curse on their livelihood, Chow Tran and his mother-in-law, Hong Le, searched the local Vietnamese newspaper and discovered an advertisement for a spiritual advisor. Based 250 miles away in Houston, her name was Daphne Nguyen Wright, and she promised that she possessed the unique spiritual power to dispel negative energy. lift curses, and restore prosperity. Chow Tran made contact with Daphne, traveling to her Houston home for a consultation. There, she performed rituals meant to turn their fortunes around, leaving the family deeply hopeful that their dark days would soon be replaced by light. But behind the promise of spiritual sanctuary lay a web of insatiable greed. Over the course of a single year, instead of delivering good fortune, the arrangement spiraled into a devastating financial trap. Daphne began extending her services to the family on credit, and the debt quickly ballooned to an astronomical sum of somewhere between $250,000 and $280,000. When the family found themselves utterly unable to pay, the spiritual advisor revealed a cold, predatory nature, learning that Chow Tran and his wife stood as the sole beneficiaries of substantial life insurance policies on the elderly couple, policies totaling at least $850,000. A dark plan began to take shape in the mind of the advisor. On the morning of June 10th, 2012, at exactly 7:29 in the morning, emergency dispatchers in Arlington received a tense call from 38-year-old Chow Tran. He requested a welfare check on his elderly in-laws, explaining that his family had gathered outside their apartment and noticed an open window, with things inside appearing to be in complete disarray. Responding quickly to the call, Officer Weller arrived at the scene. It was unusually early for a welfare check, and the sight of an entire family waiting anxiously outside the apartment immediately struck the officer as out of the ordinary. Upon entering the residence, Officer Weller found the telltale signs of a robbery. Furniture was overturned, and compact discs were scattered across the floor, suggesting a chaotic search for valuables. Initially, the officer believed the home to be empty after a quick glance into the bedroom, but as he turned to leave, his flashlight caught the faint, chilling sight of hand smudges on the wall next to a very small closet. Hesitating for a moment, guided by a deep sense of duty, Officer Weller opened the closet door. Inside, he discovered the tragic bodies of Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. They had been hog-tied with duct tape, their heads and mouths completely covered. The brutality of the scene was shocking, even to a seasoned police force. Arlington homicide investigators, including a veteran detective with 21 years of experience, were called to the scene. The physical evidence initially pointed toward gang activity: a light blue bandana, a color associated with local Vietnamese gangs, was found wrapped around a beer bottle, and a marijuana cigarette along with crushed prescription pills were left on a table as if to suggest a robbery carried out by reckless youths. However, experienced detectives soon grew skeptical. The crime scene appeared almost too perfect, as if it had been deliberately staged to lead investigators down a false path. Swabs of blood, hair fibers, and DNA from a marijuana cigarette were collected and sent for analysis. But when the results returned, they did not match any profiles in the federal database, known as CODIs, nor did they match any family members. The case grew cold, remaining unresolved for over 3 years. The breakthrough came in October of the year 2015. A young man named Willie Guillory, who had been 16 years old at the time of the murders, was arrested on a felony charge of horse theft in Houston. Because a felony conviction requires a DNA profile to be entered into the national database, Willie's genetic information was finally uploaded. Instantly, the system signaled a perfect match to the DNA found on the marijuana cigarette left at the Arlington crime scene in 212. Arlington detectives acted swiftly, arresting Willie Guillory. Under questioning, the young man broke down and confessed, revealing that he had not acted alone. He had been accompanied by his 49-year-old uncle, Bobby Guillory, a man who had no prior criminal record but was facing severe financial desperation after being laid off from his job. Bobby had been offered $10,000 by Daphne Wright to carry out the attack on the elderly couple. Daphne, acting as a spiritual loan shark, had demanded the deaths of Long Nguyen and Hong Lu so that the family could collect on the life. insurance policies, and pay off their massive debt to her. Most shocking of all was the revelation of how the killers had gained access to the apartment. Daphne had provided them with a key, which she had obtained directly from Chow Tran. In December of 2015, detectives located and arrested Bobby Guillory in Katy, Texas. Faced with the overwhelming evidence against him, Bobby also confessed, confirming that Daphne Wright was a mastermind who had orchestrated the entire plot. In August of 2016, investigators secured an arrest warrant for Daphne Wright. A search of her Houston home uncovered detailed ledgers documenting the exorbitant fees she charged her clients for spiritual services, with individual entries ranging from $10,000 to $40,000. To secure a conviction against the primary instigator of the crime, prosecutors made a difficult decision to offer immunity to Chow Tran in exchange for his full testimony. During the trial in August of 2019, Chow took the stand, portraying Daphne as a ruthlessly greedy woman who held a powerful psychological grip over his family. The defense argued passionately that Chow was a complicit partner who sought to pocket the $150,000 in insurance payouts for himself, highlighting the complete lack of written documentation regarding the alleged $280,000 debt. In September of 2019, the jury reached its verdict. Daphne Nguyen Wright was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Although the veteran investigators expressed deep frustration that Chow Tran escaped criminal prosecution due to his immunity agreement, they remained steadfast in their belief that truth and justice eventually prevail. The resolution of the case brought a solemn peace to the community, serving as a lasting testament to the tireless dedication of the investigators who refused to let a terrible wrong remain in the dark. The morning sun over Texas has a way of turning the vast, flat landscape into a canvas of bright gold and soft amber. In the city of Arlington, where the modern world blends seamlessly with the rich traditions of diverse cultures, the day usually begins with a quiet, predictable rhythm. Neighbors greet each other across neatly manicured lawns. The hum of early morning traffic plays a steady bass line in the distance, and the sweet scent of jasmine tea drifts from the open windows of family homes. For many years, this neighborhood had been a sanctuary of hope and new beginnings. It was a place where dreams